Great, thank you. Thank you to the Department of Labor and Employment Philippines and WAPES for inviting the OECD to this conference. I think it's quite funny, this photo actually. I didn't send this photo, so I was quite surprised to see it with the Michael Jackson microphone, but I might have to keep it for future conferences. So I'm going to talk about some of the work we've been doing on looking at labor market information and then give you examples. But just by show of hands, before I get into my presentation, who here knows the OECD by show of hands? Okay, so there are quite a few that don't. So the OECD, it's a long acronym. It stands for Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It was set up after World War II to implement the Marshall Plan. And now it's since morphed into a big international think tank. There's 34 countries that are core members, but there's increasing interest in working with non-OECD countries and working within countries in the Southeast Asia region. So there's many policy areas covered within the OECD. You have environment, agriculture, energy, you name it, it's being covered by the OECD. And then my focus is employment and how employment connects with economic development. So I work in a division that's focused very much on these two issues, but how they interact at the local level. So we're very much focused on implementation and how things are working together. So to talk about labor market information, what do we mean by that and who benefits from labor market information? So on the supply side, we have individuals, and we see that labor market information stimulates their career choices. It provides them information about occupations that are out there and the necessary training that's needed to connect them to jobs. On the demands, for job seekers, so if we're looking at those who are unemployed and looking for work, labor market information shows them the skill levels they need to get into a job, what the working conditions are, so what the wage rates are, what the number of hours are during a week. For employers, labor market information can guide their compensation strategies and recruitment efforts, as well as where they choose to invest and locate their actual business. So this is a very key thing for a local area to attract employers in, having the right labor market information to communicate to employers. And then, of course, for the overall skills system, good labor market information can help with forecasting, demand, and then planning training curriculum to respond to future needs. So for the public employment service, or employment services in general, we see that really labor market information, improving and collecting it is key to improving services across the board. It's an important aspect of the public employment services work for designing and implementing policies. One of the challenges is developing good quality labor market information that's timely. In particular, when we're looking at the local level, it's often very difficult to collect good labor market information. We had some good examples yesterday, particularly I thought from Germany. It was a great example of a database that's actually quite well developed, but that's not the case in all countries. So it's, that's definitely something that other countries I think can aspire to. And also labor market information, it's quite important for the public employment service in analyzing and converting it into good intelligence. And that's not always the case. In many cases, we see a database of really good information, but the actual actions that are taken to analyze and use that information are not always optimal. So within the OECD, we've been looking at the local level because that's really where implementation matters. And what we see is that local labor market information can help with the diagnostic of the relationship between supply and demand. There's strong regional variations we know that exist within unemployment rates, but also how the education system is meeting the needs of employers locally, which can lead to skill shortages. So national policymakers need to be sensitive to these variations. In looking at how to come up with a measurement of skills mismatch, we see that there are a few measures out there that look at individual skill mismatch. So I go to university or I go to a vocational education institution and then I get a job, but is that job aligned with my skills? But what we've tried to do within my division of the OECD is develop a place-based measure of skill mismatch. And to come up with that measure, we've developed this typology here, which you can see on the screen. So areas where there's a high supply of skills, being a highly educated population that's met by high demand from employers, are what we call in a high skill equilibrium. And that's the top right corner you can see on the slide here. Conversely, you can have areas where there's a low supply of skills, so that's a low educated population, that has low utilization by employers. And those are areas which we call in a low skill equilibrium. And typically these areas are, there's a prevalence of very poor quality jobs. And then outside of those, you have skill surplus regions where there's a high supply of skills and employers are not utilizing those skills. And typically we see this as an area where there's a university or several universities or educational institutions in smaller towns, for example. And many university graduates will come out of the school and not be able to find a job that's commensurate with their skills, and they won't stay in that area. They'll go to a bigger city or to another area to find a job. And then there's skills gaps and shortages. So this is where employers are demanding a higher level of skills and not finding that. So what we've been doing over the past few years is mapping countries at the subnational level to look at where regions fall within this typology. So here you can see an example of two countries. We've actually done this analysis for all 34 OECD countries. But I've chosen the UK and Korea here to give you an example. So many of you may know about the UK, how there's a big difference between North and the South, with the South being more affluent. And this analysis is quite interesting because it shows that regions in the North are more likely to be in a skills mismatch. So they're more likely to be in a skills gap classification or a skills surplus classification or a low skill equilibrium even. Whereas those in the South, and you see particularly surrounded by the London region, are more likely to be in a high skill equilibrium. And that makes sense from an economic standpoint as well. We know London's a major international city. But these sorts of analysis can guide local policymakers and public employment services in developing their strategies. The other map here we see of Korea, and we can see that very much the Seoul region is in a high skill equilibrium, whereas other regions around Korea are in a skills mismatch category. And I mean, we know that for those of us that know South Korea, Seoul is a major metropolitan city and a major economic hub for the country. So the point, again, I want to make here is that when we're thinking about labor market information, it's important for public employment services to know what the employment situation is in their local area, and then they can design tailored and cater responses to meet local needs. The other work we've been doing in the OECD is we've launched for the last 4 years reviews in several OECD countries, and we've been trying to calculate the flexibility within employment services. And when we talk about flexibility, what we mean is how much room for maneuver is there at the local level for public employment services to change their strategic approach, to change their program design or eligibility criteria as it comes down from national programs? Are they able to have some sort of influence on the performance management arrangements or on the way outsourcing is undertaken? So here you can see results from an indicator that we've developed looking at this issue. And essentially the scores work between 1 and 5, with 1 being a very low level of flexibility and 5 being a very high level of flexibility. And again, here it's, when we think about labor market information, it's this notion of that, well, I have the information and I may know about my local area, but can I actually take action? And so what we see is that areas where there's a good level of flexibility, they can do a lot more with the labor market information that they have at the local level. And then in turn, there's a greater incentive to further develop this information because they can take action. And another interesting finding from this study that we've been doing the last 4 years is that we actually see a positive correlation between the level of flexibility and then the degree to which the employment services work in partnership with other stakeholders at the local level. And you can see that here on this graph. So we have the blue bar is the degree of flexibility, which is the same values from the previous slide. And then the red is the degree of policy coordination and integration. And what we mean by that is, does the Public Employment Service work actively with training organizations and with economic development officials, with employers, with unions at the local level? Are they constantly reaching out? So, and indeed, where there is a high level of flexibility, they're more likely to work in partnership with other stakeholders. And really, we see that partnerships and networks are a critical governance tool for better connecting stakeholders at the local level and sharing information across organizations to improve how they deliver services. So we've done some work in Southeast Asia, and this is results from 2008 of a survey that we did looking at how often employment offices work in partnership with other stakeholders. And you can see here that it's not always the case across many countries in Southeast Asia. So there's work to be done here in stimulating partnerships. So this was a qualitative questionnaire that was asking employment services how often they do this work. So interestingly, yeah, there is more work to be done here. In terms of some policy principles that we've developed and what it means to work in partnership effectively, I mentioned the flexibility already. One of the other key things we see that's very important is leadership. Leadership at the local level can galvanize actors to work together and stimulate better decision-making and policies and programs. But you also need those coordination mechanisms. So we see across many local areas that often there's very informal networks. And they can work very well because people know each other and they can pick up the phone and talk to each other about what's going on and work together. But sometimes it helps to formalize these relationships by having a committee or a governance network that's mandated from the national level to do this type of work. We also see that capacity is really a key issue. So you can have good flexibility at the local level, but if you don't have strong capacity, that can lead to uneven service provision. So that's something that national policymakers need to keep in mind, is that if you're going to give more autonomy or flexibility to the local level, you need to make sure that there's strong capacity there to make sure that it's effectively utilized. And lastly, the sharing of data and information is absolutely critical. We see that this can be the glue that brings people together and helps to identify common challenges and then develop responses. So now I'm just going to highlight some examples that we've seen. One of the great things that we do in the OECD is when we go to countries and do the work, we collect lots of really good program examples which are helpful for policymakers. It's great to have the macro level analysis that we do on unemployment and various labor market indicators, but the examples that we can collect, I think, are also of really good value. So this is a example that we have from work we did in Michigan in the United States. So in the United States, they have what they call workforce investment boards. There's 600 workforce investment boards across the US. And these are boards that are mandated with contracting out and delivering services at the local level. So these boards are quite unique because they're over 50% of the structure or the membership of the board has to come from employers. And this is mandated in the federal legislation that established these boards. So they're very much employer-led. And what we see is that they're really good at collaborating. And this is a great example of around collaboration on labor market information. So there was one workforce investment board we looked at, which is located in Wayne County, which is southwest Detroit, for those of you who want to know where that is. And what they did is they used real-time, they developed a database to come up with real-time labor market information, looking at local employer job opportunities. And then they used that information in the delivery of their employment services. And they could use that information also to see skills gaps of clients coming into the office and whether they needed to go to a community college for better training. So it was a really good example of kind of using labor market information to stimulate partnerships. they actually used this information to create a new program because they realized that, a new training program, sorry, because they realized that there was an employer there that was, looking for very specific skills, and the training organizations were not responding. So the Employment Service was able to bridge that gap between the training organizations and the employers to create a customized program. The other interesting thing that this Workforce Investment Board does is they create a region top jobs report. So every year they look at the top jobs in the region, and they collect all the labor market information, and then they publish a report for people to see where the current and projected opportunities are, as well as the expected rates of pay. Another good example comes from Ontario. I have to highlight this because this is where I'm from. They have workforce planning boards in Ontario. The difference between these boards in Ontario and the US is that these boards just collect labor market information. They have no flexibility or autonomy to deliver programs. They're just tasked with collecting labor market information. So every year they produce a labor market information report at the local level, which looks at current and future job opportunities, as well as kind of the key employer skill needs. And they publish this report and try to disseminate it as best as possible. And this helps to articulate at the local level, it helps to articulate to the regional level government potential shortages and programs that need to be introduced. And it also provides the stimulus for new projects that can be developed with funding from the federal level government. Another initiative we looked at were sectoral networks called talent houses in Antwerp, Belgium. There's 4 talent houses that have been developed, and the idea is that they're really trying to bring together educational providers with labor market actors and improve school-to-work transitions. So again here, labor market information plays a critical role, and each network or talent house develops an action plan based on the needs of the sector, and they communicate that to the educational providers. So just with my last 2 slides here, I just wanted to highlight a new, or not a new, but a network that we have actually here in Southeast Asia. So the OECD in 2014 announced the OECD Southeast Asia program. And in fact, the head of the OECD, the Secretary General, was in Jakarta in 2014 to open a new office for the OECD in Jakarta. So what happens under the OECD Southeast Asia program is there's 7 regional policy networks, one of which is focused on education and skills. And we actually had a meeting in Siem Reap, Cambodia of this network 2 weeks ago. So we're seeking to kind of develop the comparative work here in the region and looking at employment, skills, and economic development issues. So this is something that's ongoing, and I just thought it would be interesting to highlight to everyone here that this is actually really a key strategic platform now for the OECD going forward. Oh, sorry. And lastly, so I mentioned the country reviews that we've had ongoing for the last 4 years. They can be downloaded, sorry, if you Google OECD reviews on local job creation. We have 16 that are in the works, of which I think we have 13 now are published. So please, if you're interested in some of the country examples, and we also outline in each of these reports the institutional arrangements, so how employment services are delivered, how training organizations are delivered, and how they work together. Please go on and have a look. I get paid by the number of downloads, so please go on and download as many as you can. So anyway, thank you very much.